Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Today is a joint webinar between Klaus, Casa, and Gunner Shot. And the topic is Israel's fight to the finish. And with me, I have a very, very knowledgeable panel. At the outset, first, let me welcome all of them. Yeah, here they are. Professor Michael Rubin, he joins us all the way from New York. Ambassador Sajanhar, he's taken time off his busy schedule and to be with us. Sir, thanks a lot for that. And of course, General Gautam Murthy. Good evening, gentlemen, and good morning to you, Michael, in New York. Uh, Welcome to this joint webinar. This is the first, I must tell everyone that this is the first of the series of the Chanakya Defense Dialogues, which is being conducted by Klaus. And Klaus, for everyone who's listening, is the official think tank of the Indian Army. And we are doing this webinar on behalf of all of them. So it's going to be watched pretty closely by people who matter. That's the first part. Second, it's been 1 year since that horrific day when Hamas made a terror attack on Israel and brought all this to this pass. And a lot of things have happened. And those of you who are listening, I'm sure, know most of it. And I'm not going to get involved with that. But today, there's a situation on ground where Israel has gone into Lebanon and there's a ground offensive on. Iran has fired 180 missiles on Israel a few days back, and everyone is waiting with bated breath as to how Israel will respond. Israel, there's something going on in Gaza. In fact, a lot is going on in Gaza still, and there's a spat on between Houthis. And as per Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel is fighting on 7 fronts if you include the Iraq and Syrian militias. To add to all this, it was something like an icing on the cake. Today morning, the X or the Twitter is abuzz and with the rumor that Iran has carried out a nuclear test. They've clubbed it with a earthquake. We don't know what's there or not, but it adds the complexity of the whole story. Right? That's how it is. So, without a further delay, I'd first request General Gautam Murthy, sir, to open the innings today. All yours. Please take on.
Good evening, gentlemen. Good morning to Professor Rubin. Jai Hind to all the viewers. Today we are holding this webinar and we have appropriately titled it Israel's Fight to the Finish. As General Shankar brought out, today is the first bloody anniversary of what has been the worst day for the people of Israel, who carry memories of the long and checkered past and of 76 years as a nation state. This day will forever be etched in the annals of its history as a day of shock, humiliation, and humongous tragedy. Israel has fought back over the past 1 year, hit hard, very hard at the Hamas, and more recently at Hezbollah. Palestinians will mark October 7, 2023 as a day when the real misery began in this century in Gaza. At least they would perhaps even call it another Nakba in this century. Israel has struck over 40,000 targets in the past 1 year. Gaza has been reduced to rubble with over 42,000 killed and 97,000 injured. Their hapless population is trapped between Hamas fighters in their midst and a vengeful Israeli army hell-bent on killing all of Hamas. Israel makes no bones about it. They've lost 730 soldiers and about 4,500 have been wounded. But they are determined to finish Hamas. While the operations in Gaza are continuing, Israel opened up the northern front, starting with the spectacular blowing up of around 3,000 pages and walkie-talkies on 17th and 18th September, to the complete decimation of the Hezbollah leadership, including its chief Nasrallah on 27th September, followed by the assassination of his successors. Israel, since last week, has mounted what it calls a limited ground offensive in South Lebanon. Hezbollah is fighting back. Today, on the anniversary of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas has fired rockets into Israel, causing casualties and damage. On 1st of October, Iran got into the war as it unleashed, as General Shankar brought out, one of the largest ballistic missile barrages in the history of warfare, with 181 missiles aimed at targets across Israel. Iran said it was retaliating for Israel's killing of the two militant groups' leaders, Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, who the latter, as we all know, was killed in the heart of Tehran in a guest house. Israel has promised a forceful response. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Tehran has made a great error and will pay for it. In the meanwhile, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said, Hezbollah and Hamas are paralyzed temporarily and Iran is exposed. Right now they're naked. They don't have the ability to protect themselves. Israel has the greatest opportunity in 50 years to change the face of Middle East. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, warned Iran by saying Iran has not learned a simple lesson. Those who attack the state of Israel pay a heavy price. In response, on Friday, 4th October, Ayatollah Khamenei led the prayers at the Imam Khomeini Grand Mosque in central Tehran. In a rare sermon, not in Farsi but in Arabic, to a huge congregation with a rifle displayed prominently by his side, he justified the terrorist attack of 7th October 23 and said that Iran and its regional allies will not back down against Israel and called for unity among Muslim nations. This was a show of strength and defiance. He called Israel's attack on Israel legal and legitimate. He further added, amongst many other statements, that the resistance in this region will not back down even with the killing of its leaders. He emphatically stated Israel won't last long and called the October 7th attacks on Israel as the correct move. When and how Israel will strike back remains unclear. In the US, three top leaders have made vastly different statements, although all three have vowed to back Israel. President Biden stated he hoped that Israel would not target Iran's nuclear facilities, while former President Trump has said that Israel must take out Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Vice President Kamala Harris has said that civilians should not be spared. So these are the signals that are coming out from the United States. Politically, the United Nations is unable or unwilling to stop the war. The ceasefire option that initially led to the release of some hostages is not even being pursued. Israel perhaps believes that the fate of the remaining 101 hostages who complete a year in captivity is inextricably linked to their success on the battlefields of Gaza. They perhaps realize that the unfortunate hostages will not see the light of day with the remnants of the Hamas leadership firmly embedded within them. Netanyahu has withstood pressures from the families of hostages for over a year now, and that is a lot of internal pressure that he has withstood. The crux of the situation, that is resolving the Palestinian problem with a two-state solution, seems even more remote today. Arab nations, while fully supporting the Palestinian cause vocally, are studiously staying away from the conflict. India too is staying away from making any active comments on the situation. So all bets are off on what happens next. But what is pretty sure is that Israel is going to strike back. What that striking back will look like, no one knows. Are we going to see another dimension of hybrid warfare? Or is it going to be a conventional war sans troops on the ground? We at CASA and Gunner Shot shall be following it closely as it will call for yet another discussion. If there's any indication where this confrontation is headed, it can be gleaned from the quotes of two Israeli prime ministers. The ball is in Israel's court. Benjamin Netanyahu last week addressed the Iranians, the Iranian whom he referred to as the noble Persian people. He said when Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. Golda Meir, their prime minister many years ago, said, if Arabs put down their weapons today, there'll be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there'll be no more Israel. So what happens next is anyone's guess. We shall be following the events closely. That's all I have to say in my opening remarks. Back to you, General Shankar.
Oh, thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for those. You give a full idea of what's happening. You reminded what Golda Meir said. If Palestinians put down their weapons, there'll be no violence. If Jews put down their weapons, there'll be no Israel. Well, it's very clear from your entire assessment that Israel will, not back down. Neither will Iran back down or its allies. And the UN is incapable of doing anything. The important thing is in this entire story, the hostages seem to have been, left out of battle at this point of time. And the two-state solution is far over. In fact, it's farther than the North Pole. And then, of course, the whole world is waiting with bated breath as to what the strike back from Israel will be. Well, we'll see what the whole story is all about. I now request Professor Michael Rubin, your piece, sir, and your assessment of the whole situation. Please carry on.
Okay, thank you, sir, very much, General. What I'm going to talk about are the two lessons which Israel has learned. But the United States has only learned one of those two lessons, and that's what's creating tension between Israel and the United States at this point. In its very early years, Israel pursued a strategy of preemption. And it really had no choice because the narrowest point between the Mediterranean and the West Bank, which was then under Jordanian control, was only about 11 or 12 kilometers wide. So if it didn't preempt, it risked being cut in half and eliminated in an initial assault. The Six-Day War in 1967 gave Israel strategic defense. And for the first time, it was able to change its doctrine from preemption to deterrence, because it figured that it could weather the first assault. And indeed, that's what happened in 1973. Now, at the same time, Israel's intelligence service went through a demographic change. In the earliest years of the Israeli intelligence service, they understood their enemies with a granularity which was the envy of any other intelligence service in the world. And that's because they had taken so many immigrants from the Arab world and from Iran that they knew the dialect and the local topography, the local politics on a neighborhood by neighborhood, if not street by street level. Unfortunately, by 1967, when Israel's defense doctrine changed, the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, was operating arrogantly. They believed they still had the same capabilities, but in reality, they had lost a lot of their human intelligence. And so this led them to make suppositions which weren't necessarily based in reality. Basically, they had an intelligence black hole. Now, that's one issue which we had. And if we transpose this to Gaza, before the October 7th massacres, the pogrom, what we see is a situation in which Israel pursued a strategy which they openly said was mowing the grass. What they were going to do was degrade Hamas's or other adversaries, other terrorists' capabilities every 2 or 3 years, because simply going in with full force, like what we see now with Israel and Gaza, would create too many casualties. Israel didn't believe that they wanted to take those casualties, and they were adverse to causing so many civilian casualties. So you had a situation in which Israel believed every 2 or 3 years they could essentially kick the can down the road. And what we saw on October 7th was that wasn't the case. And Israel learned the hard way that they couldn't simply mow the grass, they needed to uproot the lawn entirely. And of course, right now, from an Israeli perspective, they feel that there's a ticking clock. They know that they are going to be criticized by the international community, but increasingly also by the United States, no matter what they do. And therefore, in for a penny, in for a pound, as long as they're going to get criticized, they might as well try to do as complete a job as possible. When I talk about a ticking clock, they worry that if the Democrats come in, if Kamala Harris is elected president, The United States might actually undermine Israel's ability to protect itself, withhold weaponry, undermine deterrence in other ways. And so Israel under Bibi Netanyahu, but make no mistake, every other Israeli leader would pursue the same action. Their security consensus is determined not before November 5th, but before January 20th, when the new president takes over, to complete as much of the job as possible. That's what we see right now, and that's why we see Israel not only going into Gaza, but also targeting Hezbollah and perhaps Iran directly as well. Now, what's the second lesson that Israel has learned, but the United States still hasn't? And General Shankar had referred to this when we talked about Joe Biden saying, don't go after the nuclear program. The international community in the United States misunderstand terrorism entirely. Our diplomats want to believe that terrorism is rooted in grievance. Maybe it's poverty, maybe it's lack of education, maybe it's occupation. And if only we come up with some magic diplomatic formula to resolve that grievance, then the cause for terrorism will go away. That's nonsense. If you look at Hamas's covenant, they openly call for genocide against Israel and Jewish people. If you want to go back to Hassan Nasrallah, the late leader of Hezbollah, in 2002, he said, I wish all the Jews would come back to Israel. It would save us the trouble of hunting them down elsewhere in the world. And then when we look at Iran, a lot of states, the Palestinians certainly, could have grievance with Israel. But Iran has no natural grievance with Israel. It's purely ideological. And when you have an ideological enemy, it's hard to make a compromise. When people say, oh, it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that caused this terrorism in the region. Remember, in 1946, the Intelligence Division of the Department of War, the predecessor of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, was charged with determining what the greatest over-the-horizon threats to American security would be now that Nazism, fascism, and the Imperial Japanese Army had been defeated, and they came up with two. The first was communism, which made sense given the Azerbaijan crisis, which was ongoing in 1946. And the second was Islamism. Now remember, this is 1 year before the partition of Palestine, 2 years before the creation of the State of Israel. So what were the analysts looking at? The Muslim Brotherhood, which was trying to kill Egyptian leaders who were deemed too polluted by Western liberalism. Now, is it possible to defeat an ideology? The United States may say no, and Europe certainly. We're weak. I mean, we believe you need to compromise. But just to ask the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, or the Baader Meinhof gang in Germany, or the Islamic State, with the right use of force, it is possible to defeat an ideology. The problem is when you appease that ideology. That's the lesson which Israel has learned. The United States and Europe have not, which is why we see some of the disputes between allies we see a year on. But with that, let me turn the floor back over.
Thanks a lot for those erudite comments. I think you made very important points. The first thing is Israel is now operating on a very tight timeline. Right? And the timeline is very clear. Whatever their military aims, they would like to finish off by January 20th. But the political aims or the political goalposts, I don't know whether that will happen, and that we will take it up. And the second point you spoke of is ideology. You can't militarily defeat ideology. To defeat ideology, you need another ideology, a counter ideology. And we've always known it. After all, we also deal with the same two ideologies across our borders. One, the radical Islamism, which comes from Pakistan, and the other, hardcore communism, which is now seeping through from our northern borders. And now this whole story is now compounded with a bit of nuclear, flavor. So it's very complex, and Israel has hard choices to make, to say the least. And Israel has to make hard choices because, for the first time probably in its history, it's not too sure about the American support which it can get. I'll get back to this a little later because I think this is an important part of this whole story. I'll now request Ambassador Sajanhar. Sir, the floor is all yours. Please carry on.
Thank you very much, General Shankar, and thank you very much, General Murthy, for inviting me to this webinar. Always a pleasure. And let me compliment all these speakers before me, the two generals and Michael, for their very thought provoking and incisive comments. I thought what I will do is, because General Murthy has really given a very detailed account of what has transpired since the 7th of October and how the last 1 year has evolved as far as Israel is concerned, as far as Iran is concerned, as far as the proxies of Iran are concerned. So I think one point that you made also, General Shankar, in your final comment, and the other speakers have also made, is that the ball is very much in Israel's court. And it really depends upon how Israel decides to kick it or take it forward, or let it lie, or whatever it wishes to do with it. So I think the future course of events will depend very much on that. But let me go back to how we find ourselves to at this particular juncture. And there, I would say, at this moment, and possibly one could also say that many of the assumptions and many of the suppositions that were made right at the beginning, many of them have turned out wrong. And so going forward, I think we'll have to keep that in mind, because many of the assessments that we are making now and many of the projections that we are making now, they are only to a large extent speculative in nature. So they could turn out right, they could turn out wrong. For instance, at the moment, Iran has really its back to the wall. I don't think it has found itself so vulnerable in its 45 years of existence as it feels today. And the reason for that is because over these last 45 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran had very meticulously constructed forces around Israel. It First thing I would like to say is it never wanted to fight Israel directly itself. And that is why you see, even now, although it has come in tentatively, it came in April, but 10 days before, it fired all those 300 projectiles and missiles and drones. It told the Americans, it told the Gulf nations, it told UAE and the others that we are going to attack. And that also attack was undertaken with slow moving missiles, slow moving rockets, slow moving drones, so that they could be shot down. So it was basically to send a message, and also to tell its own people that we are not lying low. We are taking all action to protect ourselves. And of course, since media is heavily controlled in Iran, so they said that all these 300 missiles had landed on the desired targets in Israel, and they had caused huge damage and destruction. But obviously, we know what really happened with those 300 missiles in April. The second aspect is that Israel was always banking that its proxies, Hamas to begin with, and Hezbollah after that, that they would be able to engage Israel in a very effective manner, so that Israel would not be able to clear itself free from whatever is happening around it and come after Iran. And if that were to happen, Hezbollah has, in terms of 100,000 militias, in terms of what was reported, 100,000 missiles, sophisticated missiles, it was a much more lethal power and entity than Hamas. But that has also not come out to be true. Hezbollah has also been able to fire some rockets, yes, 9,000, 10,000 rockets over the last 1 year, displaced about 60,000 Israelis from there, moved them inside. But otherwise, in terms of a crippling damage to Israel's fighting capacity capability, they've not been able to do that. So that has been a huge failure. It was also expected. What I think Iran really also wanted to do was that it would be able to give all these 40,000, 41,000, 30,000 deaths and killings. Of course, The numbers are huge, and any number would be something that we would not like that to happen to civilians and women and children and so on and so forth. It was able to get the Arabs, ordinary Arab civilian citizens, on the streets in not only as far as the Arab states are concerned, but all around the world. You saw what happened as far as the US universities are concerned, in the UK, in France, Germany, Australia, everywhere. And I thought it would be able to provoke and incite and instigate the governments in the region to come up in support of the Palestinian people, or come out in support of the Hamas and the Hezbollah. But I think it had again very wrongly, it had miscalculated, because these are not the days of 1967. These are not the days of 1973, when six, seven countries, all of them, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Saudis, Egypt, all of them had gone together and from all sides came against Israel. No, those days are gone by. And they might have made, as General Murthy said, they might have made all these fiery speeches and statements in the UN and other international organizations, but otherwise they did not lift a little finger to come in support of these organizations and these bodies. I think basically what has happened is that none of these countries wants conflict. None of these countries wants war. All of them want peace. They have seen what the benefits of peace are. They have seen many of them under the Abraham Accords of 2020. They have established relations with Israel. Israel, they have seen in terms of technology, in terms of innovation, what the cooperation can bring for them. So they have not really come out in support of any of this. They might have made the speeches, as I said, but no support to them in any concrete, tangible terms. So I think whether it was reliance on Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, etc., that confidence has been misplaced. Also, the confidence as far as the power, the strength, the force of the Arab street, that has also failed miserably as far as Iran is concerned. As I said, Iran doesn't want to get into it. And it had sort of, and this is the last point because I know that my 8-10 minutes are getting
No,
over.
no, no. Please take your time, sir. No hurry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. But I think we need also good discussion after that, and Brigadier Rumel Dahiya is also here. The point I want to make is it never wanted to get involved itself. It said that it sort of exercised strategic restraint after Ismail Haniyeh's killing on the 31st of July in Tehran at the time of the inauguration of the Iranian president, because it thought that it was promised by the Western countries that a ceasefire would shortly be coming, and with Hezbollah in Lebanon, also in Gaza, and so on and so forth. But that did not happen. And then we saw on 27th of September what happened as far as Nasrullah, who was holed up 60 feet underground, that even his bunker was also bombed and he was killed. And now we see that even his successor, Safeddin, he is also not traceable. He's also, it's not known where, what his location, what his whereabouts are. So it is per force that Iran has had to come to putting these 200 ballistic missiles, sending out these 200 ballistic missiles on to Israel. Now we don't really know. I think if anyone in this group knows exactly what has been the impact of these 180, 200 missiles, because the mainstream media seems to suggest that one Palestinian was killed in West Bank and two others were injured. But there are some other reports which seem to suggest that many of the Iranian missiles were able to find their mark in the airfields and other air bases and other places and cause some damage. Whatever it might be, I think the Iranian foreign minister and the Iranian president have gone out of their way to say that as far as we are concerned, this chapter is over. This chapter is closed. We have taken revenge for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, of Nasrallah, and Neil Furushan, one of the IRGC commanders, senior IRGC commanders. So we are done with this unless Israel provokes us very badly. But Israel has said, although there might not have been much damage, but Iran has made a very serious mistake and it is going to be punished. Now, there are so many speculations as to what Iran could do. It says that Iran wants a regime change. How could it get a regime change there? Because, as General Murthy said, it has Benjamin Netanyahu has appealed to the Iranian people
Uh,
over the
Sir,
heads.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah,
Yeah, please don't shuffle around whoever is shuffling papers. That's coming through on the mic badly. Please carry on, sir. Sorry.
yeah, no, not all. So basically, that he is trying to get a regime change, and that is why he has spoken over the heads of the Iranian leadership to the Iranian people themselves, and the others, of course, in a very expansive way, it has been brought out what Golda Meir has said, what the other Banatali,
Naftali
former
Bennett.
prime minister, yeah, that he has said. So I think there are all these options. But President Biden has told Mr. Netanyahu in so many words not to go after the nuclear assets, not to go after the nuclear installations. So we'll really have to wait and see. My own thinking also is that looking at the statements that have been coming out of France, what President Macron has said, that we should stop supplying weaponry to Israel. And the elections are just about less than 4 weeks away. That the pressure on Israel might be, might be exercised from all sides. And I think the carrot could be in that case that we are going to get all the hostages released. As was mentioned by General Shankar, that hostages seem to have gone into the background. So at least if Mr. Netanyahu is able to get the hostages back, I think the last point I'll make here is I think Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu has been able to redeem himself over the last 1 year. He had suffered, as you said, General Murthy, that this was, the blackest day in the history of Israel since it was formed 1948. But I think to remove those memories, those very uh, traumatic memories, he has been able to do away with the leadership, top leadership of Hamas, do away with the top leadership of Hezbollah. And I think that has been the manner in which he has stood his ground firmly against whatever the world might have said against him. I think in the eyes of the Israelis, he has been able to redeem himself. Let me finish here. I think there are also other issues to discuss as to the impact on India, impact on the global south, impact on the world, impact on the region, and that of course is very much in your court, General Shankar, when you might like to bring these up to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you made some fantastic points. I must put it across. What you really said that Iran is fighting with the back against the wall. There's no doubt. Its arms have been broken, if I may say so, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or even Houthis to some extent. And you also made a point that Iran has made a mistake. I think it has made a great mistake, right? The mistake, if I put it, and if I take your analysis further, which I completely agree with, it showed strategic hesitance in entering this war. It's not restraint; it's hesitance, and hesitance and it's actually political hesitance. When you go into war, there's always, leads you nowhere, and it has tried to play the long distance card too far, the non-contact kind of warfare. It doesn't get political brownies beyond a point. Uh, from the Israeli point of view, what I inferred as you spoke, the thing which came to my mind is Israel has carried out a terrific surgical operation against Hezbollah so far. How it will go further, we don't know. It's a multi-layered operation, whether it's a pager attack, the walkie-talkie attack, eliminating the leadership, or even going and striking targets in the north. And it was also carried out a heliborne operation at Masayaf, where it destroyed a weapon production facility. So it's done very good, typical Israel manner. Again, the big question is, will it get Israel peace, or as Professor Raubin said, will it just finish at moving the grass? Okay. The major point which you made is that uh, I think with time, the Arab world and the Muslim world have become more transactional. And probably, which you did bring out, that is why they are not supporting Iran or everyone. Because if you go back to the time of the Yom Kippur War and before that, if anything Israel did, the whole Arab world was against it, but not today. And the Muslim world is no more standing next to Iran in whatever they're doing, partly because of the fact that they, Iran's proxies have been more oriented to terror. Secondly, the Muslim countries are themselves threatened by these proxies, so their own regimes are at stake. And the next point, adjunct point of this is, like, people have realized that their fossil fuel reserves are finite, and no more can they go on costly, wars with everyone. And in the name of God, they have to convert this limited, finite, reserve they have into something for their own nations. Okay, and you also made the point that Iran is in a diplomatic failure mode. Yes, I'd like to underline it. Iran is completely isolated. Even Russia and China are not able to come to its rescue, which everyone thought will happen in the past 1 month. That was the whole thing. Whether just the getting the hostages back will restrain Israel is a moot point. But then we'll come back to it, like you said. What are the implications for India? How far will USA go? How will this whole story go in the Western world itself? Is there a divide in the Muslim world, which is now apparent? Are questions which will go through. With this, I'd request Brigadier Rumail Dahya, sir, all yours.
Thank you, General Shankar. First of all, my grateful thanks for being given an opportunity to share the stage with such eminent panelists. This is the day when it's 1 year since the dastardly terrorist attack took place in Israel. And my sympathies go towards all those people who lost their kin, who suffered this. Also to those people, innocents, who have been killed in this conflict, knowingly or unknowingly. Having said that, let me start off with this point which Mr. Rubin made about many people not understanding what terrorism is. Well, this particular statement doesn't apply to us in India. We have known terrorism for much longer than even Israel. Also, many people in India always say, why not follow Israel's model of dealing with terrorism? Good for us, we did not follow that. And I'll come to that reason later, because the circumstances are different. Like Mr. Rubin said, it was more of a threat of being, bisected into two, and then a smaller country which is not much of strategic depth, surrounded by perceived enemies from all sides. And I'm not getting into the moral questions at all, because moral questions will really raise hackles across the board, and they're applicable to both sides. There's nothing much to choose, actually. But terrorism is bad. Under whatever guise, under whatever excuse, it's not acceptable. At least it's not acceptable to us Indians, because we have suffered ourselves so much out of it. Second point which Mr. Rubin made was about Mossad. Yes, Mossad has been excellent, and Mossad continues to be excellent. What happened on 7th of October last year? Well, actually, what happened, and if it was Mossad's failure, or some people say that Mossad knew that something would happen, and they would probably wanted it to happen, so that instead of, every 2 years kicking the can down the road, instead of that, they can they can deal a very big blow to Hamas. After all, Hamas, when it started, it got encouragement from Mr. Netanyahu himself. But I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I believe that Hamas made a mistake, big mistake, but their justification, of course, was that they wanted to bring the Palestinian issue again into the consciousness of the world, because the world had almost forgotten about the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause. And the Arabs were the first ones to forget about them. So they did that. My question is, now Hezbollah has been dealt a very strong blow. Hamas has been obliterated. Hamas has been defeated once, but Gaza has been destroyed twice in last 1 year. And probably it is the third time that the Gaza is going to be, destroyed again. But I do not know whether Hamas can ever be finished. Even if the Hamas leadership is finished, whether the idea of Hamas, idea of resistance, whether that can be finished or not is a very pertinent question, which Israel will have to think about. Now, when we go through, to me, it gives a sense of deja vu. Intifada 1, Intifada 2, Shabra, Shatila, occupation of southern Lebanon by Israel. Every time Israel has taken a strong measure, caused huge lot of damage to these resistance forces. They have gone and occupied areas. They got bogged down. They had to withdraw. Resistance became stronger. And then the same cycle is repeated all over again. If it is Nasrallah this time, it was Musawi in 1992. If Kani this time, there was Mughniye a couple of years back. There was Soleimani a couple of years back. Maybe Americans plus Israel, all these guys. So what I'm saying is that killing of some leaders, occupation of a particular area, destroying infrastructure, destroying weaponry and all that has not been able to bring peace. Primarily because without objective political goals, proper political goals, establishing peace and stability through military means is a very doubtful proposition. It has not been successful in the Middle East so far. Iran today, let me play devil's advocate. I'm no admirer of a mullah's regime at all. Those people who can't even treat their own population with dignity do not deserve respect. But look at them. They have not only shown restraint this time, and understandably, because sanctions have killed their economy. They have been denied technology, so obviously, technologically, they are not good enough. And if they were not under sanctions for such a long time, and if they did not fight a long war with Iraq for a couple of years, I'm sure that Iran would have been in top 3 or 4 economies presently. It would have been a different kind of an animal. But unfortunately, the situation is that it hasn't reached there. Obviously, for its purposes, it developed these proxies, and proxies were doing the job for them quite a lot. The proxies haven't succeeded. But has Israel won against the proxies? Has Israel won the war at all? It hasn't. And is Israel going to win this war? Well, how do you define that victory that Israel is going to win? Can they destroy Iran? Iran is a country of 100 million people. It doesn't share a border with Israel. Israel cannot put boots on ground. Israel can destroy its energy infrastructure. Israel can also probably hurt its nuclear infrastructure. But how will it destroy the nuclear idea of nuclear science in the minds of the scientists, despite having assassinated Fakhrizadeh and many others? Well, they have the knowledge, and I'm sure that they would have taken care to make certain facilities redundant. I personally feel that this idea of regime change, idea of defeating, reordering Middle East, might produce an outcome just opposite of what is intended. It might force Iran to go nuclear, much against the wishes of everybody else. Today we might say that Iran, is totally isolated. Well, the same thing applies to Israel as well. Israel is also isolated. this idea of two-state solution. Even America talks of two-state solution, and this idea was almost buried. I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, and to say that I think humility is required. This kind of a conflict will have to end with some kind of, ramp off for everybody. It cannot be that one side is going to win and the other side is going to be totally destroyed. Any attempt to pressurize Iran might put the same people who today do not like the mullah's regime to rally behind the flag. Iran is a civilizational country. They have a pride. They have suffered so much of pressure for such a long time. Right from the time of Mossadegh being thrown out from there, right up to this place, they have suffered. They have suffered at the hands of everybody. Russia made sure that in Sadabad, the Kurdish Republic was, established over there. Iraq has fought wars against them. Arabs have fought wars against them. So therefore, let me just say that it's a country of 100 million people with a lot of resilience. Please don't write them off. And today, the Arab street may be quiet because the regimes don't want it. Tomorrow, if Israeli F-35s and F-15s fly over Saudi Arabia and all that to bomb the nuclear facilities, which with redundancy built in, of course, then at that stage, the Arab street may not remain quiet. They might become vocal. But the whole idea of this, the regime change and all this kind of a thing, I think is a fantasy. And this fantasy is like many other fantasies that have been proved wrong and that has not come out to be true, is going to remain a fantasy that way only. I personally feel that even if they don't go after the nuclear facilities, then they go and destroy the oil terminals at Kharg Island or destroy Bandar Abbas port or something like that, and the world oil prices shoot up. How do you think the world, whom do you think the world is going to blame that time? Are they going to blame Iran, or are they going to blame Israel for having destroyed those, energy sort of facilities? And when Iran goes and blocks the Strait of Hormuz from where 21% of the oil goes. Now, how is the world going to be blaming? Whom are they going to blame? Because the whole world is going to suffer because of that. So I would personally feel that I cannot speculate as to how Israel is going to conduct its affairs. I'm also not in a position to advise Israel, nor is Israel listening to anybody at the moment. But I would definitely think that cooler heads need to prevail, and they need to give a little greater chance for ramp-offs to both sides, to themselves as well. With that, I think I'll finish it at this moment and come back.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you played a good devil's advocate, which was needed. You've given another side of the whole story. Very important. The first thing which you made mention, and I think this has to go to everyone who's watching this webinar. Very often people say, why doesn't India behave like Israel and take out all its adversaries and all that, cross-border X, Y, Z? We can't do that. And Israel and India are a different set of apples and oranges, right? Far away, so that can't happen. Yeah, the important point which I did mention in the beginning, when you had not had come in, is how do you defeat the ideology militarily? There is no way off, right? And this ideology is a reinforced ideology, and if you cannot defeat this ideology, peace will be elusive for Israel. What they can at best get is probably a temporary pause. And what is this concept of Israeli victory? I don't think, in my own way of thinking, there's going to be any victor or loser in this war. The whole lot will end up losing. That's the way things are going. And I just have a point. Well, you said that reordering of the Middle East is not feasible. I agree with you. But at this point of time, I don't know whether someone is even attempting to reorder the Middle East. What people are trying is only to do a regime change in Iran, and that too on the premise that Iran is itself a divisive nation. Because if you go back 1 year, 1.5 years back, Masa Amini, a death, a whole lot of protests rocking Iran. And Iran has internal fragilities which have not yet come, and they could come up any point of time, right? Notwithstanding the fact that it is a civilizational nation, right? And I go with your view that Iran, a whole lot, not Iran, a whole lot need to think through this with cooler heads. But at this point of time, I don't see how Israel will go or get start thinking as a cooler head if there is nothing which it can do about the whole affair. Right. I leave it at that, but I thought you played a devil's advocate beautifully because a contra argument to this whole story has to be there. After all, this conflict is two-sided. It is one against four, five, whatever it is. But as much as Iran is fighting with its back to the wall, so is Israel. And in fact, both of them are fighting with their respective backs to the wall with very little options but to move ahead. Okay. I'll get Ambassador Sajanhar back in. Sir, I understand that you have to leave us at about 9 o'clock. But before that, I would like you to tell us broadly India's options at this point of time. Because I'm going to ask each one of you India's options, USA's options. What are Israel options ahead for Israel and Iran? We'll go one by one. So we'll take yours, sir. India's options. Where do we go from here in this whole game? And then if you have to leave at 9 o'clock, I'll just say thank you in advance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, General Shankar, and thank you for being so thoughtful and considerate. I really appreciate it. Okay, so before responding, and I'll try to do it very quickly in about 2-3 minutes. If you permit, I'll make one or two other additional points, to
very please, sir, please.
Excellent
no,
points
please, gentlemen, please feel free to talk what you want. Because unless we get all of points,
yeah, Brigadier, yeah. So, first is in terms of ideology. That, if you want to defeat an ideology, it has to be a counter ideology. It cannot be defeated by weapons or defeated by army or forces. My point there would be that if you are trying to evolve a new ideology to take in one ideology that has been there for how many years or centuries or whatever, I think that's going to take a long time. The point I would like to make here is any of these ideologies are like the ideology of terrorism. Now, when India is fighting terrorism, we say, okay, anti-radicalization, counter-terrorism. But along with that, we also go after the top leadership of the terrorists. And we have seen that once, the top leadership is decapitated, annihilated, then it has a huge impact on maybe not the survival or the continuance, but at least the effectiveness of that particular organization. So I would like to make here. The second point I'd like to make, I think, General Shankar, you made a very important point that, these countries, the Arab Gulf countries, don't want Iran because it operates, to become more powerful because it operates through its proxies, which are by and large terrorist proxies. The other aspect that I would like also to mention is that most of these Gulf states, you are very right that all these are kingdoms or autocratic setups, and the Iranian dispensation is totally opposed to it. So if they've dealt with Israel, they would also deal with them in
the rest of the lot
quickly. And also the second thing is that it's a Shia Sunni thing, meaning they don't want, the total number of Shias in the world is 10% of the Sunnis. They don't want these 10% to be lording over them. I think all of us realize what the fissures between Shias and Sunnis are. Let me now come to the point that you made. And I remember I was in another webinar yesterday, and they said, which side is India on? Is it with Israel or with Iran? And I quoted what the Prime Minister had said, that you are not on either side, you're on the side of peace. And that is what you want. You don't want an escalation of the conflict, because I think as you had mentioned, Brigadier Daya has mentioned, that if the conflict escalates. So far, we have seen. I'll just limit myself to price of oil. I'll not talk about IMEC, I2U2, connectivity, trade, investment, etc. Or Houthis, bombing Red Sea, so that shipping has been forced to come down from Cape of Good Hope. Insurance prices have increased, etc. I'll not really refer to that. If the price of oil increases, I think it's going to impact on all countries, developed and developing, not only India. India's, of course, growth story is that we are growing at 7%, 7.5%. And if we have to pay for oil, not at $70, but at $100, $120, it's going to be a huge jolt to us. And then our diaspora, 8 million, 9 million. So, what we want is not continuation of this and non escalation of the conflict into a regional conflagration. And that is why I think our Prime Minister had spoken to Mr. Netanyahu when he came back from the United States, advising him not to go in for the escalation. So let me finish here, and you take this opportunity to thank you, General Shankar, and thank you, General Murthy, for inviting me, and thank all the other panelists for their excellent contributions.
Thanks a lot, sir. I thought you made some very important point. I think the most important point is we are not on either side. Very often people forget that we have good relations with Iran. In fact, we have civilizational relations with Iran.
True.
And we need Iran for the international north-south transit corridor. We also have invested into Iran at Chabahar, and we wouldn't like, and it has strategic value for us. So to that extent, I think I reinforce what you said. We are on neither side. The discussion so far has been on facts and what's happening on ground. So to that extent, when we say that Iran is fighting with its back to the wall and it's in a weak state, it is based on facts. It is not based on India's position vis-a-vis Iran or Israel. And we are stating facts. Let's put that in perspective. And we have a lot of stakes here, as Ambassador Sajan has said: oil, diaspora, fertilizers, a lot of imports, everything. Yeah. So we have to play a cool hand in this. And there's always a tomorrow. If I may add, India has a role to bring about peace in this region. With this, I now request Professor Michael Rubin. Where do you think USA is going to go, given that USA has got an election going and a lot of divergent views are coming? They're not only divergent; those views are changing at times, depending on whom you are speaking to. So, what do you think USA's large, broad-based options are? Where do you think? Give us an idea of the whole thing. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, General. Broadly speaking, the United States still stands with Israel, but there's a lot of unknowns out there. First of all, the perceptions of Israel, especially among the youth, are declining in favorability. One of the problems with this when one reaches the level of policymaking, however, and this is something that Dwight D. Eisenhower discovered after he sided with Egypt against Israel, France, and the United Kingdom during the Suez Crisis, is that it's one thing to try to court Arab opinion. It's another thing to find mutual ground and a cause for alliances with some of these countries. One can be frustrated with Israel, but that doesn't make Syria or the Islamic Republic of Iran a good ally. So after Dwight D. Eisenhower, for example, for very realistic reasons, threw Israel under the bus in 1956, it took him 2 years during the Beirut crisis of 1958 to discover that his Cold War calculation wasn't paying off. And that's why we had subsequent administrations, both Democrats and Republicans, side more forthrightly with Israel, despite the divergence in numbers. One of my criticisms, and when we look at the youth and the population in the United States, too often, and this is especially true of the Obama administration, we'll see whether it continues with the Kamala Harris administration should she be elected, is that they confuse the Democratic Party base with what they read on Twitter. I would argue that whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, those who are on Twitter and vocal on Twitter represent perhaps the 5 or 10% fringe of either party rather than the party base, but it's going to take some time to work this through. The other issue, of course, has to do with the growing Islamic population in the United States vis-a-vis the traditional influence that Jewish population had in certain key states. If Florida and New York are no longer swing states, but Minnesota and Michigan are, does this mean that we're going to see a lot more political pandering to the Muslim population in the United States? And of course, when we look at the Muslim organizations in the United States, the Islamic Society of North America, which is Qatar funded, or the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is Qatar funded, it's not necessarily true that the numbers which they put forward as to the numbers of Muslims in the United States are accurate. This is something which people are going to be looking at in the forthcoming election. We talked about Sunnis and Shia. One thing which I learned when I worked in the Pentagon in the George W. Bush administration, because of course that sectarian third rail was important in Iraq, is 1 out of every 4 American Muslims is actually Shia. I mean, we have a large population from Iran, and just like the Muslim population in Europe were largely Turkish, Egyptian, and Syrian, they fled secular dictatorships, and therefore they trend towards Islamism. The Iranian population in America fled a theocratic dictatorship, and so today they trend much more liberal and, if you will, anti-Islamic Republic of Iran. But we also have large India Shia populations, African Shia populations, and so forth, and they may not necessarily be on board, A, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, or B, with the Sunni world beyond the Islamic Republic of Iran, because remember, for most Shia, the concept of Vilayat-e Faqih is heterodox. And so we have something there where I would actually disagree with the general, is that when we look at Iran now, we see that change is coming. It may not be regime change imposed from outside, but the supreme leader is 85 years old. He's had cancer twice. He's partially paralyzed. And therefore, it's an open source of discussion about what comes next. The biggest difference between the transition now and the transition 35 years ago is that Khamenei doesn't have the charisma or the religious depth, if you will, the reputation that Ayatollah Khomeini had. I mean, if I had to give a prediction, I say we're going to have a military dictatorship next. But then the question comes, is the Revolutionary Guard truly ideological, or would we simply have a brutal military dictatorship like we have in Egypt? But when it comes to the United States, my final thought on this, look, I'm a historian, so I get paid to predict the past. And my friends would say I only get that right about half the time. But one thing which I'm absolutely sure of, when we go back to the last several administrations, what defined that administration was the crisis that no one saw coming. So for George H.W. Bush, it was the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. For Bill Clinton, it was he defeated George H.W. Bush in the 1991 elections by saying it's the 1992 elections, by saying it's the economy, stupid. He was going to be a domestic president. 2 wars in the Balkans later. Then we had George W. Bush, who again was going to be a domestic president, 9/11. Barack Obama came in saying he was going to end stupid wars. And not only did we remain in Iraq and Afghanistan, but he got us engaged in Syria and Libya as well. Donald Trump didn't get involved in a war, but COVID certainly had national security ramifications, certainly defined Trump's legacy. And now we have the same thing with regard to Biden when it comes to the wars in the Ukraine and what we see in the Middle East. And if I may go off topic, what we're about to see between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The point of this is that the next administration, I mean, we're going to see something which we're not debating right now in the United States. And frankly, the debate, this election more than any other, is so inane, so ridiculous, so detached from reality that whoever is president next, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, is, I mean, we don't even know where we're heading. The only optimism I can see looking in the future is, and we saw this with Kamala Harris's vice presidential sweepstakes, the Democratic field is deep and normal for 2028. And the Republican field is deeper and normal for 2028. So the question I have looking forward is not just about the Middle East, but how much damage can a lack of, I won't just say US leadership because the world is multipolar, but coherent US leadership have? How much damage can that cause before we actually get to 2028? But with that, let me turn the floor back over.
Oh, thanks a lot, Professor. I think you made a very, very significant point. USA stands with Israel always, but the depth of that stance is not known. It's going to vary, and these elections will lead to something. And the more important point which you made was, the next presidency might be facing a crisis which they never saw coming, and probably none of us saw coming. And this might not just be, this Iran and Israel spat. There's something brewing in the South China Sea. Every day I see it slow. It's a slow burn, as you see it's going on, and we don't know where that is going. And when you factor that in and the residuals of this, we don't know where we are going. So we are in for a difficult time, the way I look at it. And in all this, I think the core issue which you put out, US leadership and the global leadership, despite the fact that today we are looking at a multipolar situation, US is still the global leader. Will it be able to hang on to it? Will depend a lot on how things happen here. Because one more conflict anywhere, it might be a conflict too far or a conflict too much for USA to handle at the exit of the elections. With that, we'll spend some time on Iran and Israel. I request Gautam Murthy sir, please do let us know, or rather, give your prognosis as to what would Israel do and what are its likely options. Of course, we're now shooting in the dark, but that's all we can do, and we must do to a certain extent.
Thank you, General Shankar, and thank you, Professor Rubin and Brigadier Daya, for your excellent comments. I've been observing and listening to them very carefully, and my takeaway is this: that there's one important factor that Iran has to contend with, apart from Israel, is Saudi Arabia and MBS. MBS is trying to alter the shape of how Muslims view Islam and has understood that political Islam has its limitations and political Islam can be dangerous. He is seeking to change the society of Saudi Arabia, and with it, you are seeing a lot of changes in the Arab world. This has never happened before, and let us not forget that Saudi Arabia, the king and the Saudi Arabian monarchy, are the custodians of the two holiest places of Islam, particularly the Sunni version. Iran has asked for help, has asked all Muslims to unite, and Iran's theocracy, when it came into being with Ayatollah Khomeini, they had really no quarrel with Israel. And as Professor Rubin has said, Romel has said, the ambassador has said, it is purely on ideological grounds, where Islam is not being used as a religion, but Islam being used as an ideology. Now, Islam is a religion we are all living with. India has over 200 Muslims who are living quite peacefully in our country of 1.43 billion people. India has got 10% of the Muslim population of the world. It, Islam cannot be used as an ideology. Well, there would be some differences. There have been issues, there have been tensions. I'm not trying to paper them over or gloss over them. But Islam as an ideology makes it a dangerous issue. It's not so much a political issue, but it gets into the realm of terrorism and everything else. And we have seen right across the world all terrorist groups that have been using Islam as an ideology more than Islam as a religion, creating chaos. Iran, from for the last say 30 years or so, has been pushing for proxies to represent it. It is looking at states, Arab states, which have weak governance, starting with Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. They are trying to get a foothold there. They are there through their proxies and looking to increase their presence in the Arab world. After all, from the Persian empires, from the days of yore, were always looking towards the Mediterranean. Nothing has changed with this regime, with the Islamic regime. India may have good relations with them, that's a different matter. I'm not getting into that at all. But I am looking into what is likely to happen. I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have been seeing multi-domain warfare. We've been looking at the gray zone warfare. We have seen what Israel has done. There's probably another domain in gray zone warfare that we have yet to see. How that will pan out, because Netanyahu said very confidently in his appeal to the Persian people, to the noble Persian people, that you're going to see a regime change sooner rather than later. And he's not given to making empty boasts. As Professor Rubin has said, he has redeemed himself over the past year. And we shall now have to just wait and watch how it is going. Is it going to be a conventional war, sans ground troops, as I said? Or is it going to be something else? I very much doubt whether Israel would attack infrastructure like ports, but the nuclear facilities of Iran are very much in the crosshairs of Israel. How they get to it, one really doesn't know. But we will be following the situation closely, and I'm sure sooner rather than later we will be sitting across like this and discussing a completely new dimension to what we have discussed today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you made a very valid point. In my own assessment, I don't think Israel will get after the nuclear facilities and oil facilities the way we think they will with F-35s and all that. If one thing we have not learned about Israel, or rather we have learned historically about Israel, is they are always inventive of the way they do things. Whether it is in the Yom Kippur War or the '67 war, and even the pager attacks, walkie-talkie attacks. So expect the unexpected. That's the way I look at it. Right? I don't think Israel will make the mistake of the shock and awe. Don't forget the Stuxnet virus they used to decapacitate Iran's nuclear program and set it back by over a decade. I thought that was a very cheap option of with very good results. So all actions are on the ground. All actions are open. We'll just wait and watch. So that's the way it is. And I don't think Israel is foolish enough to undertake two military, adventures, one in Lebanon and one in Iran simultaneously. That would be the height of foolishness at this point of time. So we'll have to wait and watch. And at the same time, the 20 January deadline is also on the horizon. So for those of us who are completely military oriented, you'll get a lot of, grist to chew on. Now let's look at what Iran can do? I'd request Brigadier Rumel Dahiya, sir, what do you think Iran's next step is? To think that, Iran has said, no, this is what we're going to do and all that, and we have not taken revenge, and expect that that line is drawn is also facile. So your views on this whole story.
Thank you. Thank you, General Shankar. I think let me put on the hat from their side and think as to what they might do. One thing, of course, is very clear, that they have been reluctant to get directly involved in this fight. And for obvious reasons, they lack the capacity to influence the course of an armed conflict, besides what they can provide to the proxies. But like I've always maintained, and having known that area a little bit, that in Syria, every single movement of important people, every single movement of aircraft or ships is known to the Israelis. The Mossad has its agents everywhere, and they know what's happening. So that's why you hear every week, if not in lesser frequency, there is an air attack somewhere. And last one was near Hamimin air base, near where the Russians have the base over there.
Yeah.
So they bomb in Mezeh. They say Assad's own brother, younger brother, Mahir, has been killed. Mughni was killed there. The large number of IRGC stockpiles have been destroyed. In fact, they don't even say, by your excuse, sir. They just go and bomb straight away and come back, except that they don't normally claim that they have done it. So therefore, Iran has, and despite that, Iran has been at it. They haven't really given up. For obvious reasons, that Israel has greater resilience than the Israelis can really think of beating. So they are reluctant in getting into the battle. I think their effort will be, first of all, defensive, that they'll try and keep their nuclear assets as secure as they can. And I'm also sure that they have all the best of their air defense resources will be utilized to guard against any attack on the nuclear facilities. The second option, of course, would also be, the effort would be to preserve by two means, preserve functioning of their energy resources. First, because they, despite the sanctions, they I think they still managed to ship quite a lot of energy, 3.3 million barrels or something like that. And that keeps their economy going, so they'll try and keep that secure. But they also know that the threat of destruction of energy resources of their neighbors, who might facilitate or who might be seen to be facilitating Israeli attack on the Iranian resources, that also they think that they'll deter these countries from cooperating with Israel. Whether that is true or not, whether they are ready to take that risk, I don't know. But the Iranians will definitely be thinking about it. Besides, as you know, that Iran has not been able to develop a new aircraft. Iran has not been able to import new aircrafts. So therefore, aerial battles is something that probably they'll not be good at. But what they are good at, as you know, are the drones. But because of the distances involved, drones will not be that effective. And if the drones are sidestepped or positioned into Iraq or Syria to make them effective against Israel, well, I think they will be destroyed on ground before they actually land. So the only thing that they have with them, something to deter Israel, are the missiles. Now, they have some good missiles, but the production capacity, how many of them they can ship, how many of them they can produce on a monthly basis, because I think it's finite. Although, frankly speaking, Israel also has a limit. How much of artillery, how much of missiles that Israel itself can produce? And people say that even the bunker busting bunker buster bombs, which were used to kill Nasrallah, were also provided by America. That Israel has so many technological advancements, but obviously no country can have everything that it requires to fight a modern war. So Iranians basically will be defensive. They'll try and preserve their resources. They will use a victim card to go and justify their going nuclear thereafter. And this is the biggest caution that I would like to put here, that any attempt to destroy their nuclear arsenal is going to make sure that Iranians double down on their nuclear program. And they will achieve it. Please remember that Pakistani nuclear bomb was tested at Loknoor. We might say that Iran is isolated today. But tomorrow, if let us say there's a conflict in South China Sea, and America and China are face to face, who will stop China from testing a nuclear weapon of Iran? Or let us say that if America continues to pressurize Russia and permits its long-range weapons, Storm Shadows and their own, to strike deep into Russian territory, who will stop Mr. Vladimir Putin from not letting Iran test its nuclear weapons in Russia? So therefore, when Israel goes for broke against Iran, Iran is also going to go broke to achieve what it wants. And that is why I cautioned earlier that the outcome of this conflict might be absolutely opposite of what it is intended to do. Also, please understand that Israel's limitations are territory. Israel's limitation is manpower. Israel's limitation is how much they can produce. Economy, it might be bankrolled by America to some extent. But as Professor Rubin has brought out, things are changing. So far, America, Israelis always thought that America treats them as 51st state of America. And they will do anything to protect Israel like they protect any other state of America. But that thing is changing because of demography, because of America itself is stretched in many ways. So therefore, we must be very cautious before really trying to outreach or sort of stretch ourselves to the extent that, in order to do something to Iran, we ourselves make ourselves vulnerable for the long runs. Security. My last point is this: Israel is a friendly country to us. We have common challenges, we have common problems as well, and we have come to each other's help when time comes. Even during this conflict, let me say one or two companies in India have been supplying certain munitions, etc., to Israel. Israel has done the same to us in 1999, for example, during the current conflict. And there are so many things. Terrorism is a common challenge for both of us. Both are democracies in a vast area where there are no democracies, real democracies around. Despite that, my sincere feeling that comes from the heart is this: that if my children cannot come back from school safe, and I'm not confident of their being able to come from school, if I cannot work in my fields without having that suspicion of somebody might shoot at me, or a missile or a rocket might come and explode close to me and all that, if we have these kinds of feelings in our minds, then it's not a security. I don't think what Israel is doing today is really preparing itself for a long-term peace and security. And I think that is where our military mind feels very excited about when we see a military succeeding, or a military measure succeeding, your bombs doing the damage, or rockets doing the damage, or like pagers doing the, and also this becomes a hybrid warfare. But the most important factor that we must have is that people must feel secure. And without proper political measures being taken to resolve this one way or the other, the security is always going to be challenged. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you made a very good case for Iran. To highlight that Iran has its cards, Iran has cards to play, and it's going to remain defensive, and it's going to bank on deterrence, and in all probability will go nuclear through the victim route. And of course, we have to bear in mind that Iran is fighting a different war. I mean, a different kind of a war in terms militarily, because it doesn't have a air force of note. It doesn't even have a navy of note, and even its land force has never been exercised. After the Iran-Iraq war, they've never fought a war, and I don't know whether they'll be able to carry out land-based operations, and because they've outsourced land-based operations to the proxies. So that and the drones will not come into the picture. So it's going to be an interesting kind of a military outcome. But the most important thing is we still don't see a political outcome for both sides anywhere near what they are imagining, right? And both countries, if I may say, Iran and Israel, internally, it is now very clear that they're internally fragile. The politics of Israel, come from the extreme left to the extreme right, and within Iran itself, there's enough, opposition to the Muladam. So we'll see where this whole story goes. I will not take any questions, sir, because we've spent a lot of time, and I thought some very interesting points came up in this whole debate. I thought very interesting perspectives came up at the whole debate. I'd request General Gautam Murthy, sir, please wrap up and we'll call it a day after this.
Thank you very much, General Shankar. Thank you, Professor Michael Rubin, for sparing your valuable time all the way from the US. Thank you, Brigadier Dhaya and the Ambassador in absentia. I think this has been a very stimulating and discussion which has covered a very vast area. We really don't know where we are headed, but we all know that we are living, as there's an ancient Chinese proverb or curse, depending which way you look at it. We all live in, may you live in interesting times. And I think that is exactly what is happening. All the best, and thank you, viewers, very much. All viewers of Gunner Shot who sat patiently through this discussion, and we are looking forward to more discussions in the future. Thank you all. Good night, good day, and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.